Hello, everyone. It is Sunday, the 25th of August, 2024, and it has absolutely been a while since I have posted any videos. There are multiple reasons why, including my internet router completely breaking, shutting down on me. And so I had to wait to get internet access back for a few days and get a new router and configure that with all my programs. And so, yeah, it's been a little much. I thought that this new router might assist with my internet connection. It does seem a little slow this morning for some reason on my laptop. However, every other device is running. And then there was also a family incident that happened, and there was a big fire that happened with it's my stepbrother, but I mean he's been in my family since I was 4 years old, and so he's my brother. But anyway, his I guess we'd call it his girlfriend or common law wife, whatever you want to call her, common law partner. Her father was visiting them at their home, and it was like a multi-unit apartment complex in Chateauguay. This is online. You can take a look at it yourself. But anyway, there was a big fire that her father accidentally started. He was baking, and anyway, sorry, I'm getting notifications from my surveillance equipment. Anyway. And where was I going with this? Yeah, and my brother and his partner were outside on a deck, going praying or experience on how to do this type of stuff, right? And like he wasn't able to breathe, like he wasn't going well. Anyways, I'm not gonna criticize what he did, because it's hindsight 2020, obviously, and it was a tragic ending. And so he tried to get in and did eventually get him out of the building, but it was he had less than a 5% chance of survival, and so they ended up unplugging him, and he ended up passing away. They lost everything. He lost even the shoes on his feet. They melted on his feet. He has burns still that he's recovering from because of going in, and anyway. So didn't have a phone, no ID, no life possessions, nothing, no one does. And so quite unfortunate. And so I did assist with that, and obviously had to leave for a bit and help and be supportive and things like that. Anyway, so all of these things come up. And so that's why I haven't been online for a little while, but I have been sharing stuff on my other social media platforms. I haven't been doing lives, but if you look at my Instagram or my X feeds or Facebook, then there were things that I was sharing, including, information regarding Helms, which was a former CIA director who was also involved in Operation Chaos and assisting with the Watergate scandal under Nixon, and also assisting in lying to the world about the moon landings and things like that, and direct involvement with people like, that were the people that took over for the for people like Werner von Braun post World War II. Anyways, all this stuff involved. I'm going on all these tangents, but before I get into that, because I'm going to be doing a video or sharing a video rather that I have not watched in its completion. I've watched about 8 minutes of it, but I want to play it out because it talks about the Nazi connection with MK Ultra, Project Paperclip, Russia or USSR. They had their own version of that during this time as well, which is why there was that space race going on, and people and heads of army divisions and the Rockefellers and people like that. I want to talk about Tommy Robinson. I talked about this even in June. People were he is someone that is a bit of an activist, I would say, a bit of an extreme activist to say the least. And he's been getting a lot of attention. And I was on all these other big, I guess, podcasts, YouTube, and social media influencers, whatever. Before any of that happened, I was saying, look, Plaid Army, however you want to pronounce it, tomato, they had on Bethan Nodwell, and I shared that information in June, like I said, about Tommy Robinson and how he even came to Montreal, that he was going to get arrested. He's receiving as an independent journalist, or whatever you want to call him. It doesn't line up with other independent journalists or mainstream media. And then I also shared videos even after that of him with photos with him and a clear Fed plant in protests in the UK, and then giving like the acknowledgement to law enforcement on the outside observing the friggin' protests. And so again, like I've always, like, just like Ray Apps, right? Like there are people that are plants that work with the government or with even within the government, and they elicit emotional responses in people, and they try to get people to do things or enable people to do things that are criminal and or cause division and chaos and things like that. And it's frustrating that people are still not getting it, right? Like I thought that after 9/11, after a lot of information came out, irrefutable evidence coming from experts in demolitions and structural engineers, so many different experts, people calling out the crisis actors, the explosions on the multiple levels, Pentagon, how that was not an airplane that struck it at all, it was explosions, and surveillance that proves that as well, and then money that went missing, and anyway, there was just, but again, inside, but it was part of like this international friggin' deep state that think we're idiots, I guess. Not all of them, but like they think we're fucking idiots. And they like the moon landings. We like most people believe in that for so many different reasons that I'll get into, and like the space exploration stuff and this woke ideology that's that's not new. Anyway, Tommy Robinson is part of the he's a plant, and he's part of the drama, right? He's another fucking puppet in the circus. Yeah, and his he's not as trustworthy as people think that he is, and it's unfortunate and frustrating that people think that he's some kind of a hero, some kind of an activist. You know what I mean? That's going against the woke narrative, but he's also someone that's eliciting emotional responses in people on both sides of the extreme spectrum, left and right, creating division, and he's getting paid to do it. Right? It's so friggin' annoying. But the mainstream media influencers, or the popular ones, are eating it up, still eating it up. And again, even Dr. Jordan Peterson, and I think he's a brilliant person. He's a genius. So I'm not slagging him in any way. I would love to do that, or reinforcing like a false narrative. And anyway, it is what it is. But take a look at Bethan Nodwell and that Plaid Army interview that she had done a few months ago, and she was with him. She knows him personally. I'm talking about Tommy Robinson, and even in that network, she was saying that she had witnessed him doing hard drugs in Montreal with a guy named Ravi, and others, and then talking about the fact that he was going to be getting arrested in the future. And then what happens? He gets arrested a whole bunch of times, and then people 2 fucking months later are sending me all of these videos about Tommy Robinson, this hero that's getting arrested because he's like pushing against the woke agenda. And I'm like, bro, I literally just warned you that this was going to happen 2 months ago. Anyways, or like a month and a half ago. And anyway, so like, why are you? Anyway, it is what it is. I told you, I warned you against it, and you fell for it anyways, and you follow my shit. So anyway, it is what it is. I was in his connection with the Clintons, and the fact that he is he's donated or given to the Clinton Foundation approximately anywhere between $15 and $25 million over the years, and he's had involvement with the Clintons for decades. And again, it's interesting that he has a Ukrainian and Iranian background and an influence, heavy influence, and international influence as well, I would argue. And interestingly enough, people are trying to connect him with money as well, nowhere near to the extent of the Clintons, but still. So just something else to look into. And this is all connected, and that's why I wanted to share this video about like MK Ultra, Project Paperclip, and like CIA, FBI, like the high level involvement, and how like around the same time, within like a couple of decades, things just blew up, right? Like this, like this international corruption, I'm calling it, in treason, and exploiting the masses, and getting our taxpayers' money, and using that again for their own agenda, right? Like their own benefit. And the people that are trying to push for socialist, communist systems of governance, and claim that this is some kind of a model for utopia. It's never worked. I've said this before, and it's in fact caused more suffering and death towards societies than even like the right wing stuff, fascism, and whatever else you want to compare it with. And they would never follow those rules anyways, right? The people that are trying to push for this and promoting it and saying that this is like the best way moving forward, they're trying to keep you stuck, because it gives them more money and more influence and more, assets, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, and so people are still falling for it, which is frustrating. I'll leave it at that for now. I'm going to reiterate that oil is not a fossil fuel. This was again something that the Rockefellers, very influential for generations, they came up with the term, and there was a Geneva Convention, a Geneva Science Convention in 1892 that I've talked about before, and Fletcher Prouty talks about it as well. Fossil fuel discussed this event and said that they kind of separated the terminology from petroleum, made it into what they wanted to call a fossil fuel, because again, it's the same people that are it's also pushing and reinforcing the narrative regarding evolution and dinosaurs and all that other bullshit that we're being lied to about, right? So like, again, these are people that had their hands in all the fucking pots, and yeah, and then just writing the scripts, planting the seeds, and again, like it's multiple angles, multiple avenues of approach, and so not just one angle. And so there was two reasons. Well, there was multiple reasons for this, but they also wanted it to appear like oil or petroleum was scarce and a finite resource, and depletion allowance and stuff like that were pushed. Like literally, this is because people were monopolizing on human emotion and behavior in order to exploit us and allow it to become something that like we're paying so much money for this stuff, guys and girls. And even the transportation of oil as well. And again, this is like these industries are owned by a small group of people that are lying to us about what it is and how much of it there is, and yeah, and they're also the ones that are conducting the civil wars, the proxy wars, the world wars internationally. It's the same group of people. So, anyways, they wanted it to call petroleum fossil fuels because they were also wanting to as well. And again, this is something that where they were taking also from petroleum, they were taking these petrochemicals and pushing that into the pharmaceutical complex, right? So for vitamins and for minerals that were being sold. Yeah, that even like some of the oils that you're consuming, like the canola oils and stuff like that, it was literally lubricants for engines, vehicles, things like that. And we're consuming this in large quantities, and people are wondering why we are getting fat and dumb. Anyway, it is what it is. But so there was that angle, the scarcity, the monopoly of the oil industries as well, and yeah, it's all the same people, the Rockefeller types, and so yeah, even with that, their argument for fossil fuels that there was hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon in petroleum, and by virtue of that, it was a living. It came from like they kind of like threw in the whole like dinosaurs because they were larger, so there'd be more petroleum, some a fossil, because I was raised in the Gaspésie, like very much like farm fucking area, and I lived in a shack in the woods in the middle of fucking nowhere, and I've seen plenty of dead animal carcasses and stuff like that, and I don't see any rotting or residual like oil or matter or anything like that anywhere. And so like just please tell me how you get fossil fuels out of dead like animals and humans, like from their, I believe to be from largely derived from trees, matter like that, from and the foliage, and then for the for underwater, like the seaweed and like any of the plant life or whatever you want to call it underneath as well, like the dead rotting matter of like that. Anyway, and so completely just fucked with everyone. And anyway, and even the shape of the Earth. I'm not going to get too much into that today or at all, really. But I will say that even that, like around the same time with NASA being created, and and Disney and Paramount and Paragon, like all of these they were part like same class. So anyway, I'll get into that. RFK Jr. He's going to possibly be the one that investigates them in the U.S. But then also looking into the involvement of the deep state or the government into the assassinations of his father and his uncle, which is really friggin' mind-blowing. Independent say that he would definitely be taking votes from both, but I don't know. Like I think because like his family lineage, the Kennedys are Democratic, and I believe that like even within the Democratic Party, people are getting sick of like this woke, like extremist push that's really harming the nation, and so they might want another option, right? Not 4 more years of Kamala ridiculous policies and things like that implemented, and then again more of this woke push with her and Walz. Like this is not a good combination, trust me. And but again, I don't think that Trump and Walz is either. And this is where I lose people as well in my on my videos. And I don't think he's I don't think he's a bad person. I'm not saying any of that stuff. I'm saying that he is the one that through COVID he pushed the vaccines to be rolled out. He was the one that introduced Space Force, and again, you have an Air Force that you can expand further out. You know what I mean? But again, this is a contained environment. We have not been to outer space. I believe that the possibility that the outer versus inner cordon of this cosmos would be the Kármán line, which is approximately 100 kilometers at its highest level. I don't know. Maybe a lot more. So, but a radiation belt that assists with this containment that no one can go through, especially with aluminum alloy, and yeah, with the temperatures that are that are comprised allegedly in these radiation belts that the people would have to go through, and the high levels of. Anyway, it's just I don't think it's possible either, even by virtue of that alone. And this is a pressurized gaseous environment, and even with that, Boyle's laws and the laws of like these are laws in place, like not theories, but that gas needs a container. I'm all over the place. The Republican side as well, because there are people that do believe that Trump is either and that people think that he might be involved in the like the court hearings that he was doing, that again as part of the circus, and to distract us further, divide us further, and indirectly it gave him much more power and influence and voters, and so this works, and yeah, and so and possibly that like the assassination attempt was staged and planned, and he may or may not have known about that as well. And there's a lot of inconsistencies and reporting that was completely wrong. And if you look at my Rumble videos and YouTube, if they're up, or and not deleted. I haven't taken a look at my YouTube, but yeah. Anyway, there's just a lot of reasons why people don't want to vote for Trump, even within the Republican side, that they would absolutely have chosen RFK Jr. whatever his name is as the next option. And so it's unfortunate that he didn't go in. He wasn't going to win anyway, but like it would have been nice. But we'll see how that goes. I didn't really listen to the speeches from like the DNC. I did a little bit, but again, it's just so friggin' painful. Kamala Harris was doing nothing but talking about herself and complaining about Trump, really not talking about the border crisis or inflation or none of your like undecided. Like I don't know, like she's not. It's just oh my. And then lying about not lying, but alluding to the fact, hinting at the fact that Beyonce and Taylor friggin' Swift was going to be there. Are you kidding me? And then not confirming that was not the case, right? Like they were letting this roll out when there have been people like even Elon Musk, for example, there was rumors that he was going to go to some kind of a Republican convention at one point, and he corrected it even before the day, right? Just to like make sure that people knew that he like, no, this is not true. This is fake news. And but anyway, so it's unfortunate that like they're doing that. It's so petty. And yeah. So I also wanted to talk about Candace Owens. I love her work. I think she's an incredible woman. Again, I don't know her personally, but I've seen a lot of her content. I don't agree with everything, so I just wanted to say that like she's been talking about conspiracy theories lately, and she's talking about questioning the moon landings and space, and I'm really excited about all of this stuff. But like I can't talk because I'm a French Canadian, like intense and passionate when we're talking, and but yeah, so I get it. You know, sometimes I like name call, and I shouldn't name call. It's like that's like such lower level stuff, like what I'm talking about, like Chrystia Freeland or Rachel Maddow. You know, like I do sometimes name call, and I know it's immature, and it's but again, it's something in my discussion points, and yeah. But anyway, she was like talking about straight homos, and I was like, oh my god. And so for me, like I don't like she was alluding to the fact that some men are beta, and they're targeting strong women or women on the more traditional conservative side because they're intimidated by it or insecure about it, and so they're not man enough to approach men, but they are certainly comfortable to approach women, right? Because we are physically, generally speaking, like or the weaker sex, right? But that doesn't mean that we're intellectually the weaker sex, and so it is what it is. And so I think she means beta male, but like saying that, like it just really, again, it just insults homosexuals as well. And like anyway, there's just a lot of now groups, and it's because of a small minority of people that I think that are sexual perverts and deviants that are not part of the LGBT, even T community. They're just because again, I share stuff on Blair White. I have hired trans people and fully supported them with their operations. They were adults at the time. I don't support it for children because of the whole informed consent, irreparable damage, especially when they're developing, and it could be a phase. It could be exploiting children that are either homosexual or have gone through trauma or possibly autistic, and they're exploiting the narrative in order to profit and gain. Like, and these are supposed to be medical experts and professionals, and there's a lot of clinics that have popped up since 2017 where it's booming, and so there are disgusting Frankenstein type motherfuckers out there that put on a lab jacket jigger, and they're anyway homosexual, of course, because like you can't advance a race without procreation. Like I'm just being obvious with that. And it's always been, again, like a small minority of people, but it doesn't exclude them. It shouldn't exclude them from abandonment. Yeah, so it is what it is. If you can't contribute in one way, it doesn't mean that you can't in another. That where there's a societal gain, and also like, because if you look at the DSM-5, like disordered thinking, like a mental disorder, and like it's like gender or biological sex dysphoria, and I'm all over the place. So there's a difference between a weak man and a gay man. That's all I wanted to say about that. And there's a lot of weak beta males that, again, it's their sexual preference is irrelevant. And Palantir Gotham and biometrics and military contracting, and I don't know if I already said CIA involvement, and then my concern with that, because CIA involvement at the higher levels for decades has been led by men who are absolutely pushing a narrative that is false, whether they know or not. I believe that someone must have known, but if they didn't, still, that you had the wrong job. You were supposed to know this shit, figure it out, and you didn't. And you were ushering in for years. Who was a director for decades and program stuff, this, by these people as well, all around the same time. This like mind control, brainwashing operations, stuff that was going on. It was all connected with the same people, the high level people, the high level psychiatrists, psychologists, scientists, doctors, lawyers, heads of states, anyway, heads of banking systems, education systems, medical institutions, and have multiple name changes, like last names included, of their children, their offspring, and then have them go on and move to other places, again, internationally, in order to keep that fucking spider powerful. Or this documentary. I hope it plays. And so I want to play it out just if you would like it to. Huh. I don't know if you can hear it, but I do have it where it says it's sharing. Okay, now it's saying I'm having trouble connecting. But so good news is I've given up on it. I got it yesterday or the day before. Sorry, I got it Friday. I thought with a new router, everything would be much better, and it seems like it's not. So I have already talked to to Starlink, and unfortunately I have to go with Starlink where I am months because again, like it's anyway, and within groups of people that are creating the scripts, and again, does he not know that his fucking rockets, like these rockets, have not been to the moon or Mars, and that they're landing in the Bermuda Triangle and other areas, and that satellites are within our fucking cosmos, and anyway. So yeah, Starlink. There's an initial connection fee and stuff like that. I've already talked to the providers and the people that install it, and so that's going to be something that I'm going to be doing immediately, and canceling this one. But that will take a little bit as well. And so at that point, I will have great internet connection because it's pointed upwards, so the connections are via the satelloons or the signals being bounced off aircrafts. Now, enjoy.
Weekly podcast ranging from conspiracy theories, health, pop culture, and much, much more. All right, so let's get into it. So, Mani, what do you think? Is there some truth to this mental illness associated with MK Ultra? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I believe so. We've read that the DSM, which we touched on a little bit in last episode, is very subjective. And after doing more of a deep dive into this topic, it seems there's actually a bigger question about whether or not mental illness is tied to the CIA or even Nazi ideologies. And later in this episode, we'll speak on MK Ultra. So I guess just to review real quick, the DSM, that is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So that's basically the text that they use to diagnose if somebody has some form of like mental illness. This is a quick little recap of what we touched on last time. And right now there's like a newer version, DSM-5 TR, that was like established in or published in 2022.
Right, and like you'd mentioned in the previous podcast, one of the biggest purpose put in here that the creation of the DSM involved field trials and tests, which we're going to get into. A house is built on sand, if you will, with this whole field trials and tests and stuff that they did for this creation. It's actually quite scary.
Yeah, because you wouldn't think, because it's so subjective, that we'll definitely get into what their testing was and where it all started later in this episode.
Cool. So where did it come from? Basically, the APA, which is the American Psychiatric Association, they basically own the DSM, and in a sense they can, or the organization can basically monopolize the diagnosis of mental disorders for like all mental health professionals. So the DSM actually dates back to the 1840s when the government wanted to collect data on mental illness, and they went by like a different name. I think in 1917, the Bureau of Consensus like embraced a publication called the Statistical Manual, Psychological Association. It's all like a really big mouthful. Basically, all of that mouthful is the APA, American Psychiatric Association, as we know it today. Yeah.
So, and then people, associations or organizations being created and announced on like the 20th of July, 1945, or, moon landings, July 20th at 1969, presidential inaugurations or speeches on, I believe it's July 20th. So you've got that anyway. So like, and with July 20th being the 201st day of the year, and then you've got the 201 with January 20th. And anyways, there's so many different things that people do within these communities, these universal numbering systems and symbols and algorithms that they use. It's for their own communication, and they think that we're too stupid to figure it out, or maybe they just don't care. Maybe they don't care, right? Okay, I keep on saying they think we're just too stupid, but it's like, how do you not, right? When like people are believing fucking everything you're saying without verifying anything, and like not even thinking about what they're saying or looking at what they're like. It's just, and even if you look at these moon landings that were like the videos from Russia and India, come on, guys. And China, come on, guys. It looks so fake. It's so fake. Sorry, tangent over.
They made the first DSM book, and the first DSM book was born, and it was called DSM-1, right? I think, yeah.
I believe so.
Right. So that was published in 1952 and had about 106 disorders. And I highlight 106 disorders because it jumps up after the third DSM, which I think could be reasons why we see a lot of crazy people walking around today, or fake crazy people. I don't know, made up stuff. But basically, these weren't even considered disorders. These were referred to as reactions. And the term came from some guy named Adolf Meyer, who had a psychobiological view that mental disorders represented reactions of like personality to psychological, social, and biological factors. And I was like, I thought about that and I thought, okay, that sounds reasonable. There's a bunch of different factors, so that's why. And biological factors, Mani, would be more like environmental in a sense as well.
Yeah, it could be like I guess more of like your like physical response. Like I think of like maybe like your actual physical or biological response to something that
Mm,
they were either testing on you, and social might be more like linked to like environmental influence or like your interactions with like people or whatever it might be. And then like psychological kind of like your emotional response or like thinking processes.
right. So a bunch of different factors basically would go into the reasons that you may have these reactions, as they called it at the time.
Hmm.
So, but a significant shift happened when the DSM-3 was born. Of course, there's the DSM-2 in between there, but what we really want to focus on is the big shift in the DSM-3 that was published in the 80s. So they basically dropped like the whole psychodynamic perspective, which I guess seems to be in favor of the old reactions and psychological personality, social biological factors. And they were in more favor of imperialism, which is just like plain English truth, quote unquote, I guess in their terms, whatever they want to call truth. But they expanded it to about 494 pages with 265 diagnostic criteria. And I know, Mani, you
Wow.
probably know this better than me.
So yeah, it is very suspicious that the number increased to 265 diagnostic categories.
Mhm.
And in each category, there's typically like several diagnoses that fall under that. In the DSM-3, it was 265, and it jumped all the way to that from just 106 disorders in the DSM-1. Quite a jump.
Yeah, yeah. And so I was looking into it on a Psychology Today style article initially, and it was like, oh, time it seems like the big shift happened because there was lack of clarity within the public, and contempt was probably complete bullshit, because this reminds me of the Rockefellers and what they did to standardize our medical, like Western medicine. So we're going to get into that, and why I think that. But so according to Psychology Today, oh, there was contempt brewing in America about psychology. So they were thinking about a reason to expect this in money making machines, human experimentation, which our country knows very much about.
Well, yeah, I think that's totally true. Like, it kind of points to like you have to like look outside the box and think outside the box. Like, was the APA possibly bought out by pharmaceuticals? You
Mhm.
know?
Yep. And what you'll find is that there was basically a psychiatrist by the name of, I'll probably botch his name, Emil Kreplin. And there were these people who were neo-Kreplins, basically, that had reemerged around this time, who just wanted to bring about his legacy and what he taught, or whatever the case. So
Mhm.
it seems as though there was a task force around, I think it was 1974. Robert Spitzer became chair of the American Task Force, and he was overseeing, with a couple of other people, the DSM-3, which is the big shift that we're talking about now. But he is considered a neo-Kreplinian, whatever the hell they're called. And we'll get into Robert Spitzer a little bit later as well, because he's going to come into this more. But why I wanted to talk about Emil Kreplin is he's got some really, really scary ties with the Nazi Party, and we'll get into exactly why. So, does any of this sound familiar to you people? I think back to Rockefeller and Western medicine, as I had previously mentioned. Back in the day, Americans were very big into herbal and natural medicines. Like the people that you look at today as being naturopaths and like quackery type stuff, that was the norm back then. But the Rockefellers were obviously, everybody knows them for big oil, but they also had something called petrochemicals that was like hot in the 1900s, which science world was getting really excited about. But if they're producing petrochemicals to make vitamins and or medicine, they need people to buy that medicine, but they need maybe sick people to buy that medicine. So in
Mhm.
in comes IG Farben, basically. That's a German pharmaceutical company. And IG Farben has a really, really nasty history with Auschwitz concentration camp. Basically, like, Money, it's kind of like disgusting when I even saw this. So Rockefeller buys them. IG Farben Company creates a subsidiary near Auschwitz concentration camp called IG Auschwitz concentration camp, where a bunch of these pharmacological substances were tested on the mentally ill, basically like eugenics programs,
Oh,
sterilization. So like,
Oh my God.
wow.
and this is out there. This is not this. Yeah, we did a deep dive, but geez, I feel like anybody could look at this and be like, oh my gosh, like, are you joking?
Dang. So the Rockefellers are Nazis.
Yeah, I mean, you could say at this point, maybe it's
Yeah.
just money or
They funded both sides of the wars. So there's no sides. Left and right, same bird. Yeah. I've talked about the ants in a jar. You got black ants and red ants. Put them in a jar. They'll be fine and not do anything to each other, but shake the jar and they'll kill each other. And they go after what they can easily identify. The physical attributes first is always first. And so they're going against the like right against black. But it's not anyone's fault within there. There was no ant within that jar that disturbed the peace. It was the person that shook the jar. They're shaking the friggin' jars.
or whatever the case. It doesn't. Yeah, sure, maybe it's all about money, but these are. Oh my gosh, this sounds. This there yeah, anyway, there's a bunch here on the Nazi influence with the Western medicine that we want you to just keep in mind going forward for the psychology portion of it, because psychiatry is in its infancy, like what, 150 years at this point. And Mani, you were dead on last podcast when you were just like, this is too subjective. I just like it almost just gave you a bad feeling, you know?
Right.
So.
Yeah. And there's a really good little clip here that I found on Rumble. It's like 2 minutes. We can link it at the end of the podcast. It's the highlighted one there. It's how one man took down America. It's just a little tiny review about Rockefeller and how he accomplished this.
So the DSM-5 and the significant change that we're going to talk about. So the third edition leaned more towards this psychiatrist Emil, right, or Kraepelin, basically. But Kraepelin believed that biology and genetics played a key role in mental health disorders, and that reemergence of the neo-Kraepelinism came back in the 1980s, which is why the DSM-3 was born. But if you look into Emil Kraepelin, like, I put like a little summation of his ideas right here. I don't even want to read this portion of it. There's something even worse about him, honestly. I'm just going to get into that right now.
Like the elitist class too, like of course they're going to say it's like biology and genetics, like that makes people superior. I mean, there's a certain truth to that, where if you're selecting for evolution and you're selecting a partner based on having the ability to have like the most optimal outcome for for offspring, like going for, I hate to say this, but like looking at men that are bigger, stronger, taller, smarter, richer, more leadership qualities or characteristics, procreating with a male partner that would possibly like benefits, again, like people call that like eugenics or selective breeding and stuff like that as well. So I get that aspect of it, but nurture and the environment that you are raised within is hugely impactful as well. All right, because there's such thing as epigenetics and working on deficiencies and things like that. But when it comes to trauma, or like I mean, there's even more links coming out. I've been talking about fluoride for years, but like it's now like more out in the open, where there's people within government that are admitting that fluoride is a neurotoxin that it's directly linked to lower IQs in children, all of that stuff, and that's in our water systems, that's in toothpaste, that's in like so much stuff is coming out. Where even aspartame is it's human and E. coli feces. All right, and then these these petrochemicals that were that were recreated or rebranded as like vitamins and minerals. Some are effective, some are not. And yeah, there's just and then even with social media misinformation and educate, like just like how if you take a look at like a grade 6 level student from 100 years ago and what they knew and the tests that they were given and compared it to us now, we would like people are even saying, like the experts are saying this, that even PhD level graduates would struggle with like grade 6 level education systems from years ago, many years ago. And we're getting distracted by so much propaganda, psyops, like woke ideologies, and things that don't matter, that are not important. And we're allowing our civilizations to de-evolve, and what's being put in our food supply, our water supply, our atmosphere, lying about the reality of the world. This is causing emotional and spiritual dysregulation and manipulation. And yeah, anyways, I'm going on all these tangents, but it's cruel and inhumane, and there are people that should be investigated when they're like perpetuating this narrative. Justin Trudeau was involved in this as well, and his family, whether he's a willing, knowing participant or not. Like even his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, could be Fidel Castro. Who knows? He, you know, on December 2nd and 3rd, but December 2nd of 1969, had the astronauts, the fake astronauts, like fucking Buzz and Neil, and in Ottawa, on Parliament Hill, congratulating them for the successful moon landing and stuff like that. But again, like so that was the first announcement of a moon landing ever, because you can't fucking do it, by the way, they were all faked. And so did he know it or not, right? Like he was very powerful, he was very wealthy, he was very well connected. And yeah, so who knows? And so was Margaret Trudeau. And so yeah, do they not know? Because Justin Trudeau, he's been a terrible leader now, but still, he's the Prime Minister of Canada. It's been like 9 years or whatever. And he's pushing the same narratives, and it's bullshit, and it's very obvious. And I've been sharing data with all levels of government, including his office, like his email address that's online, because he is a member of Parliament, and they all get issued government fucking email addresses and phone numbers that you can call and be respectful. And yeah, never any follow-ups.
Originally began his medical studies in 1874 at this university called Leipzig, but he completed his university at this university called Wurzburg, right? But to give context to this, Hitler commissioned the Organization of Action T4, which didn't mean anything to me at the time, but it's basically an Operation T4 that led to the mass extermination of patients with deficiencies or mental pathology. So this is Hitler later on. So think about Hitler later on, and Emil being in this university before all of this happened. It seems like as if he was the pioneer, one of the pioneers of all this weird experimental stuff. So Hitler, when he commissioned the organization of the Action T4, he commissioned it to Karl Brandt. Karl Brandt was his personal physician, Hitler's personal physician, and a professor at the psychiatry of Würzburg University. So it seems like all these guys come from these same places and do the same things. And Kraepelin also, they don't mention this in like these Psychology Today articles and just like snippets of information about him, but he was really creepy. He believed that, let's say, while biologists use social Darwinism, Kraepelin was the first to apply these terms not to just individuals, but to social groups and institutions. So basically, gypsies, poets, swindlers, Jews were prone to hysteria in his eyes. And Jews, in addition, were psychopaths. And it seems as though like he had a lot of influence. And I don't think I mentioned this yet,
Yeah,
but
because he was a fucking Nazi.
think he mentored about 3 prominent Nazi psychiatrists.
Crazy.
Obviously, he later died in 1926 before the rise to the power of the Third Reich, but he mentored these 3 psychiatrists who were well known in the Nazi Party, and they actually have talk about Emil Kraepelin as well. So it's not like it gives me like goosebumps, you know, just to know this.
Yeah. So, okay, so just to get this straight then. So Action T4, that's kind of like a program that they studied in school about like euthanasia. It was also referred to as Operation T4. Is that kind of all the same?
Yep. they had basically like a euthanasia program. It was like mercy deaths, and it was either called Operation
Oh.
T4 or Action T4. And like, to give more context to even this, the Kreplin also studied at this person's laboratory, but it's an experimental laboratory, Wilhelm Wundt's laboratory. And I don't know if he has much ties to the Nazi party. He probably freaking does, but I didn't find anything here. But the first psychological lab in the United States was created by one of Wundt's students, and they created the first experimental psychology lab in the United States. So they've been experimenting on people for a long time. And the first lab was in 1883 in the US from these people overseas.
Whoa.
So
Dang.
yeah.
So we definitely have like Nazi ideologies in our psychology, like education and like system starting way back then.
Yeah, it's almost as if people just think, oh, Hitler's rise to power. You had said this in the previous podcast that, and I know you're going to mention it later, but the psychiatrists were basically carrying out a lot of this, and it seems as though there were the mass Kevorkians of taking lead on mass extinction, mental hygiene, racial hygiene, right?
Yeah. Like they were willingly doing these things and like researching, aka like experimenting and then like killing these people. They were willingly doing it, I think, even before Hitler was like commissioning this organization, it sounds like. That's where all like the Nuremberg trials and all of that kind of came into play later. But all of that, like all the ideologies of the Nazis are still like intertwined with, you know, the ideologies of psychology today, based on all of this that we're reading now.
Right. And our psychiatric Bible, the DSM, that's had a ton of updates and all this stuff, is based off of this guy, Kreplin. And even if you look at his wiki page, right, at the end, it mentions Rockefeller, eugenics, racial hygiene interests. So it's not like, you know, I found some information not on wiki, but just to show you the wiki page at the bottom here of this snippet, it says, in the later period of his career, as a convinced champion of social Darwinism, he actively promoted a policy and research agenda in racial hygiene and eugenics. I mean, it doesn't get more clear. And if that guy, Robert Spitzer, who we're going to talk about later, there was like a reemergence of that, it almost seems like, were they working together, and then maybe were the Rockefellers involved in some sort of pharmaceutical way? I mean, maybe not IG Farben, maybe some other type of pharmaceutical company that they purchased or whatever the hell, you know?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there you have it. Definite Nazi influence on the APA there. So just to get this straight too, so Kraepelin, he was like an influence on Hitler and like the DSM books. And from there, that's when like this Robert Spitzer guy, I think his name was, that's like he was like the head of the APA, and then like he liked Kraepelin's ideas and kind of brought them forth like through his influence on the APA.
Exactly. This guy is the new guy,
Okay.
Robert Spitzer. He's the head of the task force and, you know, writing the new diagnostic criteria, which jumped, as we mentioned. But the big reason for the jump was because of this guy, Emil. But apparently he later like denounced the fact that
Freud was, in fact, disturbed. I'm getting comments on StreamYard. Yeah, Freud and some of the people within his network, also pedophiles and people trying to groom children and convince the world, even adults, that it was okay and that this was like something that was natural. Are you fucking mad? Yes, it turns out he was.
he believed in any of the neo-Kreplinism, and I would understand why he would, because a lot of his stuff is rooted in Nazi Germany, but it seems like everything is rooted in Nazi propaganda and like social experiments and all these terrible things to us anyway. I think everything kind of has to be denounced. But yeah, exactly.
And then, I remember you mentioned just recently here that there were 3 psychiatrists that Kraepelin mentored, and it looks like one of them here is kind of like the head in one of the concentration camps or something. There's Roger Gopp or whatever, and then there's Paul Nisch, and Ernst Rudin.
Where's Rudin?
And then let's say Niche. It's kind of like quiche.
Yeah.
Niche was the director of he was the director of a hospital where tens of thousands of mentally ill were killed under the guise of mercy killing. Oh my gosh. So he was the director of the hospital where this was happening. Because that's when before we mentioned that some of these concentration camps or death camps were on the same premises as hospitals.
Yep.
I think we had mentioned that in the previous podcast, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And
okay.
if you read further, it says that Niche later headed the entire T4 euthanasia program. And remember, T4 was Hitler's euthanasia, the euthanasia program. It's euthanasia just sounds too nice, like the mass killing of mentally ill people, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So I see where like a lot of the people that played into like the development of the APA over time had I guess they had liked the ideas of Kraepelin, which he sounds like a pretty bad guy with not like direct Nazi ties.
Yeah, I mean, I'll read a snippet that I have here and we can link this as well. It's just from archive.com and somebody an author talking about Nazi psychosis in regards to Kraepelin's psychiatric perspective, basically. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to go over to the right side, and he talks about Kraepelin's successor, Robert Gaup, which basically said he stated that Kraepelin's work compromised nothing less than the foundation of all Nazi racial hygiene laws. The central concept in Nazi ideology was the symbolization of immortality. The German medical profession was designated the central intellectual resource of the new order, or as Rudolf Hess put it, the National Socialism is nothing but applied biology. I don't know what any of that first part means, but I know this dude was all about racial hygiene and like cleaning up the race.
Oh my gosh, the terminology that they use to try to make murder sound better, racial hygiene, is unreal.
I know.
Anyways,
well, back in the day in the US, it wasn't called mental health, mental illness. I mean, we went from retardation. It was mental hygiene at some point in the US. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not.
So, they probably they got to play on words there. They probably really mean like retardation hygiene, racial hygiene.
Yeah.
So
I know. And nowadays they're like, oh, you're not retarded. You just need to express yourself through gender dysphoria.
I know. Oh my gosh. And we're going to get into that's like a whole other rabbit hole that we stumbled across in this that I just feel like is even more grotesque, but we can keep going.
Yes. So based on all of that we just went over, again, the DSM-5 or the DSM overall wasn't really objective.
No, my gosh. So there basically was a British author that explains this in a book called Cracked. His name is James Davis, and he focuses in on how pharmaceutical profits played into the DSM and how actually that guy, Robert Spitzer, that we had mentioned, the author interviews this guy and he admits at some point that the criteria was unorganized and subjective. Basically, like there was no rhyme or reason, like exactly what you were saying before. Like it just felt subjective, up in the air. Like I knew you had a bad feeling about it, but like, for example, the guy who wrote this book, he mentions a bunch of other stuff, but I just thought it was ridiculous that he heard it from the horse's mouth. Spitzer from the DSM task force saying that, like, let's see, for example, Spitzer says, well, it's true that for many of the disorders that were added, there wasn't a tremendous amount of research, and certainly there wasn't research on the particular way that we define those disorders. In the case of Millen's quote, I think he's referring to something the author asks him at some point. I think he is mainly referring to the personality disorders. But again, it is certainly true that the amount of research validating data on most psychiatric disorders is very limited indeed. So it's bullshit.
Wow.
I mean, to me, that just sounds like you could just shorten that and say this, it's just BS. They were voting. They were putting their hands up, talking over each other. Like if you get into this deeper, that's what Cracked is about. in that regard.
Mhm. Wow. So this guy who wrote Cracked sounds like he has some pretty objective and actual quotes straight from the horse's mouth, like you were saying, about the DSM-5 being subjective. So yeah, just keep that all in mind, and we'll get more into how that ties into influence later, I guess, with like MK Ultra.
Well, yeah, because the author James Davis also talks about the biggest, largest bulk buyer on Amazon of the DSM today, which is Pfizer. So they buy it, they distribute it. And the DSM is the Bible in the world of psychiatry. People and they didn't make money before with the first DSM-1. Like, they didn't make money like that on 106 disorders. Now this is the bedrock for disorders. And these people who created this, Robert Spitzer, like, one of the guys that was on the voting panel with him, I forget his name, he didn't want to add Millen, I think that's his last name. That guy didn't want to add a certain personality trait because he said, I have that personality trait, so I don't want to add that. That's one of their reasons for not.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, it's like, you think somebody could get dumber? Yeah, they can. Dumber. Like,
And you had an outrageous statistic here that we found about pharmaceuticals and their kind of like infiltration or bias in the APA task force. So what is that percentage of those who are in the DSM task force and their involvement in pharmaceuticals?
oh yeah. So, okay. So the DSM-5, which I don't think is the current, I think you'd mentioned DSM-5 TR or something is the current, but let's say for the most part, the current DSM-5, there's basically currently 69% of that task force, the DSM task force, reports to having ties to pharmaceutical industries. So this represents a relative increase of over 21% over the proportion of the DSM, I guess, 4 task force, which had 57% ties. So it seems like they've always had ties, and it's only increasing.
Right. Right. And I bet you if we were to kind of look at the statistics since the DSM-3 was published, which is kind of the time frame of when we were thinking that it was possible that the APA had been incentivized with pharmaceutical money type of thing, we could probably see an upward trend in the DSM task force individuals being directly linked to pharmaceuticals.
Right. And another huge thing that James Davis talks about and everybody talks about is the increase in mental health disorders from the time the DSM-3 came about. And people are like, oh, well, people didn't know they had that disorder. It's like, no, you've created a lot of these disorders through your fake voting systems, basically raising your hands and talking over each other. And now this disorder is put in play. And now I think I have this. So I have this. And now I have a medicine to take. Oh, okay.
Yep. It seems as though they are just making these things up, like you were saying, to overdiagnose only in order to overprescribe medications. And it's all just a money-making business. But now I guess we can kind of get into like how they're making these quote unquote like mental illness or mental disorders. We can get into like why we think they are made. So it sounds like, so I know we've talked about this before in previous episodes about MK Ultra victims and often being like diagnosed with like disorders such as like schizophrenia or multiple personality disorders. But we were suspicious that possibly because of this like possible over diagnosis and like made up diagnoses in the DSM-5, we were suspicious that maybe they could actually be a set of like reactions, like they said earlier, from like different traumas from being like MK Ultra victims. And an MK Ultra victim, like, reminds you, can be like someone who like was directly involved in like MK Ultra, maybe someone who is like sex trafficked or something like that. But it can go, I guess, as like simple as like in today's world where we are like directly impacted by like the 5G towers, where they're using like various like radio wave like type of frequencies on us in order to like create these kind of like health issues. So yeah, I think that MK Ultra is probably exactly why we have such a wide range of diagnoses in the DSM-5 and why it's such a subjective thing. And so where do we think this all kind of started? Like, I guess we can talk about like Project Paperclip.
Yeah, so it seems though as though, and I've heard people say this all the time, Alex Jones, everybody, Project Paperclip, but now even just looking at the DSM-5, it just seems that it came from Nazi doctors, but not just any Nazi doctors, the importation of Nazi doctors to the US through that secret program called Project Paperclip. So basically, at the end of World War II, German scientists and technical experts were being held in detainment camps, but it became like this highly competitive recruiting effort instead of holding them in detainment camps. So they brought them over here, and then they're just experimenting on a mass scale. Like they're doing a really good job right now, segregating the crap out of us and killing us in some form or fashion. But yeah, it came from there.
Yep. Yep, so the direct ties right there with the CIA bringing Nazis over to our country via Project Paperclip. With all that being like said, then kind of like one of the bigger questions here is like, can diagnoses in the DSM-5 or in the DSM in general be covering up symptoms of those who are victims of MK Ultra? Like if the research is going into the DSM all being like subjective for the most part, then physicians who use diagnoses to label individuals may not actually have like mental illness per se, but they may actually just be presenting with symptoms of those who are like mind controlled, like directly by being like trafficked or something, or mind controlled just by having like repeated exposure to these like frequencies and all these other type of CA tactics that they use just in today's world.
Yeah, and I'll stop sharing this just to make it a little bit more interactive. It's so interesting, and there's so much information in this. And if you look at Freedom of Information Act request, FOIA, or FOIA, however you're going to pronounce it, this is a CIA.gov reading room document 067602669er, and publication date April 3rd, 2018. Project MK Ultra 155457700. Approved for release. There's so much in here about the experimentation for extended periods of time, people that died, whether it be jumping off of buildings or committing suicide or killing people. There's a connection too with Lee Harvey Oswald and Ruby, by the way, died shortly thereafter of committing events, or possibly being blamed for events that were done by other people, like shootings, and but involved with the Nazi fucking scientists and psychiatrists that were grooming them. I would essentially say, and that was something that with even people that committed like huge crimes in the in this era. There was connections with them and like the same psychiatrist, and even in Montreal in Canada, we had his name was Cameron, last name. He was heavily involved in the same type of stuff with the LSD, with the mind control, with the electroshock therapy, with all of that stuff, and he was very much also connected with the U.S. This transcends national boundaries, ladies and gentlemen. Materials which will render the induction of hypnosis, even through drugs and electroshock therapy. Mentoring candidates subject through mind control techniques was a goal of MK Ultra and related CIA projects. Approved for release. Anyway, suggests that chemical, biological, and radiological. Yep, I said that. Means were investigated for the purpose of mind control as part of MK Ultra P21 LSD early efforts focused on LSD, which later came to dominate many MK Ultra programs. So anyways, even the hippie movement, I believe, was largely created by these people. Huge psychological operations going on. And I've also mentioned Johns Hopkins University in Cambridge is fully involved in psychological operations and propaganda, and alluding to future events like COVID, pandemic, tabletop operation 201, and Claydex, classic examples, just even pre-COVID, October 18th of 2019 in Johns Hopkins University. And May of 2018, I believe it was. Anyway. Yeah. The rabbit hole runs deep, but it involves the same players that have been at it for a very long time.
We can kind of get into like a few individuals here that are kind of big players with the CIA and MK Ultra, starting with Sidney Gottlieb. I don't know if that's how you say it.
Yep.
But I'll just call him Sidney. So Sidney was an American chemist and spy master who headed the CIA in the 1950s and 1960s assassination attempts and mind control program. And the mind control program is the same as MK Ultra. Then we also have this guy, Alan Dulles. He was the director of the CIA who hired Sidney into the CIA in 1951.
Yeah.
So Sidney worked on Project Bluebird with with special interrogation techniques on captured prisoners and black.
And I'll reiterate, FBI was also involved in this. Hoover also involved.
Sites.
J. Edgar Hoover, not Herbert Hoover. Relax. Anyway.
And remember, we had spoken in previous episodes before. The CIA tends to like change names of their operations, and I feel like that's just to kind of keep us confused and like trying to figure out their timeline and how they're in what direction they're navigating and everything. So there was Project Bluebird, which was later referred to as Project Artichoke, and that was led by Sidney. At the time, he was using drugs and attempts to like break their ego control in order to like elicit information for like interrogation.
Like Operation Paperclip, for example, was also called Operation Overcast. And there was also Operation, I can't friggin' pronounce it. Also, anyways, that was coming out of Russia around the same time. Anyway, I do have to go. A little over half an hour into this. I'm gonna share this possibly later today or tomorrow. I'll share the rest of it, and I want to further carry on with the deep state connections, and not even deep state. I hate even saying that word. Like this elitist class of people that go to Bohemian Grove and Davos and the island, whatever you want to call it, resorts or areas where people, again, like they own these places. It's very private. It's very secure. There's underground tunneling systems and private jets that land in these areas. And so it's really easy to hide like who's meeting with who and who hangs out with who. And I would argue that people that are even like heads of countries that pretend that they are at war with other heads of other countries, it's all a farce. It really is. They're all connected at the higher up levels. And and they have been for many, many years. So on that note, I will leave it at that. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.